Merry Christmas. If we're not careful in the midst of all of the mystique and the romanticism surrounding the Christmas story, it's easy for us to forget one simple yet very profound truth. Christ has come. Christ has come into our world. Obviously, we live centuries after the advent of mass media and technology, but can you imagine what the headlines would have read that day that the Son of God has been born into our world? Every once in a while, we catch a headline that makes us chuckle, a headline that makes us raise our eyebrows, kind of like this one today. I feel like our government is full of those kind of people, or headlines like this. Obviously, somebody forgot one of their ISSIs, but that's okay. Or headlines like this. I feel like I don't even need to read the article, you know? So, or headlines like this. It's probably a smart strategy. Or headlines like this. Not sure what they were expecting to find. And then we read headlines like this. Can probably all agree on that. And headlines like this. And we would raise our eyebrows. We would chuckle. It's the kind of headline we'd expect to find in the National Enquirer. Stories that we would consider to be impossible. And yet it is not impossible. Because that is the truth that played out in our world today. And it's a reminder for us that the Christmas story is inherently supernatural. And it brings us to this overarching truth that we need to consider today. That Christmas either means more than what is commonly supposed, or it means nothing at all. It is either true and the birth of Christ did indeed send ripples through time and history, giving meaning to the past and redefining the future, or it is not true. And Christmas is nothing more than just another secular holiday with a festive spirit. But this morning, since we're in church together, we're going to operate on the assumption that it is true. And if it is true, then surely Christ coming sends us a message about God. As a matter of fact, the writer of Hebrews, one of the letters written to early Christians found in the New Testament, says this: the Son, Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. Meaning that if you and I want to know what God is like, we need only to look at the person of Jesus. And if Jesus ultimately teaches us what God is like, then surely the birth of Christ has something to tell us about the nature and the character of God. This morning we're going to look at a quick excerpt of the Christmas story found in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew writes that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. We don't know a whole lot about these Magi. They're often referred to as wise men. We've got Christmas songs that refer to them as kings. What we do know is that they were most likely astrologers. They were astronomers. They were studiers of the sky. And somehow one day they notice a star in the sky that was not there the previous day. And instantly they recognized from the ancient Jewish prophecies that God had done something remarkable. So they made the trek of over 900 miles from the region of Partha, which would be what today would be like modern day northern Iran, all the way to Judea to see this work that God had done. And they arrived in Jerusalem and they asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all of the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And they replied, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." And this morning, the Christmas story teaches us that God is faithful. When the wise men arrived in the city, they went to the seat of power. They went to King Herod's palace to inquire of him, where is this newborn king of the Jews? Herod felt very threatened by this news, so he goes to the leading authorities of the law and says, hey, we've got visitors from a strange land that are inquiring about the newborn king of the Jews. Where do the ancient prophets say that the Messiah is to be born? You see, the Magi knew to be looking. The people of God had been looking for centuries. And the reason they had been looking is because God had told them that he was coming. God had told them over and over again throughout the centuries that a deliverer, not just of the people of God, but for all people everywhere, would be born of the lineage of David, Christ, the Savior of the world. There are over 70 Old Testament prophecies that speak to the coming of the Messiah that were all fulfilled in the person of Jesus. In 1932, in the third game of the World Series between the New York Yankees and the Chicago Cubs, in the fifth inning, one Babe Ruth stepped into the batter's box and belted his second home run of the game. That in and of itself would have been legendary in its own right, a legendary figure doing what legendary figures do, coming through in the clutch. But that day was a little different. All game long, fans from the Chicago Cubs had been heckling Babe Ruth. And before he stepped into the batter's box at this particular at-bat, he made a motion to the center field bleachers. And he proceeded to drive the next pitch over the left center field bleachers, and that day became the stuff of legends because Babe Ruth called his shot. In the person of Jesus, God called the shot. God did exactly what he said he would do. God is faithful. Author Ann Voskamp writes that hope is the defiant reliance on God keeping his word. And this morning, you and I, no matter our circumstances, no matter our life story, no matter where we find ourselves emotionally, where we find ourselves relationally, no matter where we find ourselves financially today, we can have hope because God keeps his word. We can have hope because God is faithful. The second thing the Christmas story teaches us is that God is good. Not only did the prophecy give them the location of the birth of the Messiah, but it also gave them information about his nature and his character as well. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. You and I this morning have ideas, opinions, beliefs, perceptions of what we believe God to be like. As a matter of fact, several years ago, researchers at Baylor University did a nationwide study trying to drill down into the religious beliefs of Americans. And one of the things they tried to ascertain is, what do people really believe God to be like? And they distilled all of the responses and found out that there are 4 prevailing attitudes toward the nature and the character of God. Some believe God to be authoritarian in nature, like a dictator in the sky, barking orders, do this, don't do that. Some believe God to be benevolent in nature, like a cosmic grandpa that just wants all of his children to be happy, so he just lets them do pretty much as they please. Some Americans believe in a critical God, one that is condemning and judgmental in nature, that's always quick to point out our flaws and to judge us when we step out of line. And yet others believe in a distant God, one who exists but who is out there and not very involved in our world. But God revealed himself as the kind of God that he really is when he said, I will be their shepherd. You see, for you and I today in a modern, technologically advanced world, the idea of a shepherd doesn't carry the fullness of meaning as it did to a people in a day and time that were very agrarian in nature, who were very familiar with cultivation and herding and farming. And they understood the importance of a shepherd because they knew the nature of sheep. Sheep are not the brightest of animals. They're prone to wander. They're prone to get lost. They have no natural defenses when faced with danger. They're not fast. They don't have fangs. They don't have claws. They have no way to defend themselves other than get back. And that's probably not going to do them a whole lot of good in the face of danger. You see, sheep by their very character are in need of a shepherd. One of the Old Testament prophets, Isaiah, said this about us. We all like sheep have gone astray. We each have turned to our own way. Somewhere along the way, we believed that we were big enough, good enough, strong enough, wise enough to figure out this life thing on our own. We decided we didn't need God. We didn't need a shepherd. We didn't need a leader. We could do it on our own, and we found ourselves lost. We found ourselves in danger. We found ourselves in dark and dangerous places with no way to find our way home. And God could have said, you picked it, you chose it, you figure it out on your own. But he did what any good shepherd does. He came in search of us. He did what any good father would do for his children. He came to lead us home. Several years ago, I read a story about a young Brazilian family growing up in a poor village not too far from the big city of Rio de Janeiro. And at a young age, young Christina's father abandoned her and her mother, Maria, leaving them to fend for themselves. Maria worked hard over the years, as many jobs as she could, balancing taking care of Christina and providing a home and food and clothing and education for her daughter. And they were able to get by. But as she began to grow older, Christina's dreams and aspirations were much bigger than the small, dirty village that she grew up in. She was allured by the bright lights of the big city and its endless possibilities, at least the ones that existed in her own mind. Her mother Maria warned her over and over again, it is not as you suppose it to be. You don't know anyone there. It's a cruel and dangerous city. Besides, how would you make a living for yourself? How would you provide a home for yourself? But Maria constantly lived in fear of Christina's ambitions. And one morning, just as she had feared, she woke up and found Christina's bedroom empty. And she knew in an instant where Christina had gone. And she knew in an instant what she had to do. She mustered every dollar she had available, went to get a bus ticket for the way to Rio de Janeiro, but before she went to the bus station, she made one stop at a local convenience store and spent every remaining dollar available that she had on photos of herself. Because she knew that her daughter, in spite of all of her aspirations and dreams, that her stubbornness might drive her to do things that she would not otherwise choose to do, just in an attempt to make all of her dreams and all of her expectations come true. So she boarded a bus to Rio de Janeiro, proceeded to visit every nightclub, every bar, every hotel, where street workers and hookers might congregate. And at every stop, she did the same thing. She took a picture of herself and taped it to a mirror, pinned it to a bulletin board, taped it to a phone booth in hopes that one day her young Christina might stumble upon a picture on which she had written a simple message on the back. Ultimately, time and money ran out. She boarded a bus back for her small, quaint village in hopes that one day her daughter would find her way home. After months of living in a big city that did not live up to her dreams and expectations, early one morning, Christina stumbled down the flight of stairs from yet another hotel. And as she was walking across the lobby of that hotel room, she saw a familiar image. Instantly, her eyes began to burn and her throat began to tighten as she made her way across the hotel lobby to a picture of her mother that had been pinned on the bulletin board in that lobby. As she pulled the picture off of the bulletin board on the back, she saw a simple message written in pen that said, whatever you have done, whatever you have become, it doesn't matter. Please come home. And that's exactly what Christina did. And in the person of Jesus, God has pursued us with the message that whatever you have done, whatever you have become, I don't care. Please come home. Because that's what love does, and God is good. Thirdly, the Christmas story teaches us that God is near. On down in the story, Matthew writes that on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. God was no longer out there somewhere, But instead, he was right here. He was seeable. He was touchable. He was approachable. In a day and time when the gods of the Greco-Roman world were otherworldly and viewed humans as mere pawns in their cosmic games, Jesus broke the mold, not only by associating with humanity, but by becoming it as well. Born in a stable that smelt much like the little pen out in the parking lot this morning, full of the muck and the mire of animals, Jesus came near to show us there was no place too dirty. There was no place too far that he would not go to reach us, to rescue us, and to lead us back home. The Apostle John, one of the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, gives virtually no ink to the Christmas story. And yet he summarizes it this way: the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. The infinite God wrapped himself in flesh and blood and became one of us. Experienced everything you and I will ever experience. Every pain, every emotion, every heartbreak, rejection, loneliness, misunderstanding, confusion. He experienced it all so that we could know the depth of his love. In all of humanity's religions, it is man reaching after God. But in all of his relationships, God reaches for us because God is near. One of my favorite Christmas songs, not my favorite, if you were here last week, that's The Little Drummer Boy. Ba-rum-pa-pum-pum. One of my favorite Christmas songs. Oh, come, all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. Oh, come ye to Bethlehem. But again today, we have a tendency to romanticize the story. And if we're not careful, we paint this image of that's the only ones that are welcome in Bethlehem, the faithful, the joyful, and triumphant. But the reality for many of us in the room today is that we don't feel faithful. We don't feel joyful. We don't feel triumphant. And therefore, we do not feel at home in the Christmas story. But I dare contend today that we could rewrite the lyrics to say, oh, come all ye faithless, ye joyless and defeated. Oh, come to Bethlehem, because you are the ones that he came for. He didn't come for the rich and powerful. He didn't come for the good and the righteous. He came for the lonely and the broken. He came for the defeated and the sinful. He came for you and I. And this morning, if you're weary from disappointment, the invitation is to come to the one that is faithful. Today, if you have found that this world is overpromised and underdelivered, the invitation is to come to the one who is good. And today, if you feel distant and alone, the invitation is to come to the one who is near. Would you stand with us this morning? I've asked the band to sing that song again for us this morning. And today as we sing these lyrics, oh come all you faithful, and you don't feel like that describes you, sing it anyway. You joyful, if that doesn't describe you this morning, sing it anyway. You triumphant, if that doesn't describe you, sing it anyway, because the invitation remains. Come to Bethlehem, see him, behold him, know him, receive him.